Born in Poland and raised in the cramped tenement blocks of Chicago's near North Side, Ottilie Klimek spent a decade poisoning her way through 5 husbands, a string of cousins, and anyone else who got in her way. Even buying their coffins before they died, knitting her own mourning hat at their bedsides, and calmly announcing their deaths to the neighborhood before they happened. Suspected of killing 14 people across nearly a decade, she was tried for the murder of exactly 1. Join me as we uncover the full story of Chicago's most calculated poison widow, Tillie Klimek. By 1921, Chicago's near North Side housed one of the largest concentrations of Polish immigrants outside of Warsaw itself. Families had been arriving since the 1860s in a migration pulse called za chlebem, the migration for bread, drawn by Chicago's packing houses, steel mills, and factory floors. In some blocks of the neighborhood they built, more than 450 Polish immigrants lived on each acre of land, packed into tenement buildings along streets like Milwaukee Avenue and Winchester Avenue, where parish churches anchored daily life, and neighbors knew one another's finances, marriages, disputes, and losses. It was precisely this insularity that allowed certain crimes to go unexamined for years. When a man in a tenement apartment died of stomach pain and prolonged fever, it did not prompt investigation. Gastrointestinal illness was expected. Death in working-class households arrived quickly and without explanation, and the paperwork reflected that. Causes of death recorded in general terms, bodies buried without chemical analysis, insurance claims paid without scrutiny. The weapon at the center of this case was a household product called Rough on Rats, an arsenic-based poison developed in 1872 and sold legally to kill rats, mice, cockroaches, and other vermin. It required no prescription and no registration. Arsenic is odorless and tasteless, and its most visible symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain, could be easily confused with other common diseases of the time. Administered in careful doses over weeks or months, it produced a slow, wasting decline that looked, to any physician not specifically testing for it, like natural illness. In January 1915, New York City's government had released a report warning that murderers were easily escaping justice because skillful poisoning could be carried on almost without consequence. Chicago was no different, and in Little Poland, nobody was looking. Ottilie Kupczyk was born in Poland in 1876 and arrived in the United States as a young child, settling with her parents in Chicago's Little Poland neighborhood on the city's near North Side. She grew up entirely within that community, its streets, its parish churches, its kitchens, and yet, despite spending virtually her entire life in America, she spoke only broken English. Neighbors knew her as Tillie. She was a stout, plain-spoken woman with a dark sense of humor and a reputation, in her earlier years, for cooking that drew people to her table. She married her first husband, John Mitkiewicz, in 1890, at only 14 years old. It was a common enough arrangement in working-class immigrant communities of that era, and, by most accounts, the marriage was unremarkable. They lived together for nearly 24 years on Lubeck Street, in the same dense neighborhood where they had both grown up, until January 1914, when Mitkiewicz fell ill. His death certificate listed the cause as heart trouble. Tillie collected $1,000 in life insurance and, within weeks, married a laborer named Joseph Ruskowski, who lived nearby. Ruskowski died in 1914 as well, leaving behind approximately $1,200 in cash and $722 in insurance. Later that same year, a boyfriend named Ruskowski, who had recently ended his relationship with Tillie, also died. 3 deaths in a single year, all connected to one woman, and not one of them investigated. What authorities would later piece together was that, during this same period, Tillie had been present at the illness and death of 3 young cousins from the Zakrzewski family. Stanley Zakrzewski died in 1912 at the age of 16. Stella Zakrzewski died in 1913 at 23. Helen Zakrzewski died in 1915 at 15. The source document notes that Tillie had tended to each of them during their illnesses. Their deaths were recorded as natural causes, absorbed into the neighborhood's collective experience of early death and hard winters, and never revisited. Tillie had become popular for her cooking, and it was at her table, through food prepared by her hands, that this pattern repeated itself without interruption across nearly a decade. Neighbors who knew her described a woman who spoke about death with a flatness that unsettled them, who told acquaintances when her husbands would not last much longer, not as a fear or a warning, but somewhat like a declaration. When those statements proved accurate, the neighborhood attributed it to something between superstition and premonition. While contemporary accounts describe her cheerfully telling her husbands and neighbors that they were going to die, no record exists of her ever formally claiming to be a psychic. She was not predicting these deaths. She was scheduling them and announcing the dates to anyone within earshot. Frank Kupczyk and Tillie were married on the 17th of February 1919 and moved into the apartment at 924 North Winchester Avenue, the same address where Tillie had previously lived with another man, recorded only under the name Myers, whose whereabouts as of 1923 were listed in police documents simply as missing. Frank was a laborer. He had a life insurance policy, and Tillie had arranged to be named sole beneficiary before they settled into that apartment together. She began telling the neighbors almost immediately after the wedding that Frank's time was limited, not as speculation or worry, but stated with the same flat certainty she had used about the men before him. She told acquaintances on the street, she told the landlady, she told Frank himself each morning that his death was approaching, and she informed anyone who would listen that he had approximately 2 inches left to live. As he declined through 1920 and into 1921, she sat at his bedside and knitted herself a black mourning hat, the hat that she planned to wear at his funeral. She had already located a coffin being sold at $30 and stored it in the basement of their building after requesting the landlady's permission to keep it there. Frank Kupczyk died on the 25th of April, 1921. The official cause was listed as natural illness. Tillie collected the insurance proceeds and, within months, had remarried. The death of Frank Kupczyk did not stand alone in the record of that apartment, that street, or that family. Among those who had attended the wedding party Tillie held after their marriage was her cousin, Mrs. Rose Trzynski. Rose Trzynski died in 1919 after attending Tillie and Frank's wedding party. Her death drew no investigation. Running alongside Tillie's own history was a parallel record belonging to her cousin Nellie Koulik, with whom she remained closely connected throughout this entire period. Nellie's first husband, Wojciech Sturmer, died in 1918, and arsenic was later found in his remains. 2 of Nellie's children, Sophie Sturmer and her twin brother Benjamin, had died within a month of each other in 1917. Nellie's granddaughter, Dorothy Spera, had died at the age of 2. Whether the deaths in Nellie's household were independent of Tillie's own crimes, or whether the 2 women had been operating within the same network across the same years, was a question investigators had not yet begun to ask. In 1921, nobody was asking any questions at all. Tillie had already moved on to her next husband. Joseph Klimek was aware of what the neighborhood said about Tillie, and he dismissed it. When family members raised concerns before the wedding, he assured them he was a healthy man who intended to stay that way. Before they married, Tillie destroyed every photo and letter she had kept from her previous husbands, a gesture Joseph interpreted as devotion rather than the systematic removal of evidence. They moved into 1453 Tell Place and co-signed a will leaving their combined possessions to each other. He deteriorated quickly. By the time his brother John Klimek grew alarmed enough to act, Joseph had lost the use of his legs and was suffering severe abdominal pain. 2 of Joseph's dogs had recently died, and John couldn't help wondering if that meant something. Despite Tillie's objections, John called in his own doctor to take a look at his brother. That doctor was Dr. Peter Burns, who examined Joseph, recognized the symptoms as consistent with poisoning, and called for an ambulance to Cook County Hospital. The hospital tests confirmed the doctor's suspicion. Joseph had been ingesting arsenic over an extended period, administered through the food Tillie prepared for him. He recalled to the doctor how their dog had died after eating some of their food scraps, and that some of Tillie's cooking had a strange taste to it. He had not connected those 2 facts until the hospital connected them for him. On the 26th of October 1922, Tillie was arrested for the attempted murder of Joseph Klimek, and the following day, Nellie Koulik was arrested for providing her with the arsenic. After 18 hours of interrogation, Tillie confessed, telling investigators that Joseph had been unfaithful and abusive, and that the life insurance policies she had recently taken out on him had nothing to do with what she had put in his food. Joseph remained in hospital for more than 3 months. Partially paralyzed by the arsenic that had accumulated in his body, he survived, and he had every intention of telling the state exactly what had happened at 1453 Tell Place. The arrest opened a dam. Within days of the news spreading through Little Poland, neighbors, relatives, and former acquaintances came forward with accounts that police had never been given cause to hear before. In all, the list grew to 20 suspected victims, 14 of whom had died. Authorities exhumed the bodies of Tillie's former husbands in sequence. Deputy Coroner William McNally reported the findings. Mitkiewicz's remains contained 11.2 milligrams of arsenic. Ruskowski's contained 13.8 milligrams. And Kupczyk's remains held 8 milligrams. In each case, the surrounding soil was clean. The arsenic had not leached in from the ground. It had been administered before burial. A search of Tillie's home uncovered traces of arsenic and rat poison. 2 neighbors who had argued with her came forward to report that they had fallen gravely ill after she gave them candy. The dog on Winchester Street that had died in her household was confirmed to have been killed by arsenic. Lillian Sturmer, a 15-year-old whose mother was Nellie Koulik, reported that she had lived in Nellie's home for a year at the age of 13 and had been made so severely ill by the food there that she still suffered from heart problems. John Sturmer, Nellie's son, told investigators he believed his mother had attempted to poison him as well, in the same year his father died. When Tillie was arrested and questioned, she gave investigators the details of a conversation she claimed to have had with Nellie. She had told Nellie that she had grown tired of Frank, and Nellie had suggested divorce. However, Tillie had declined, telling her cousin she would handle it a different way, and she alleged that it was Nellie who had then provided her with a substantial quantity of rough-on-rats to do so, which Klimek dissolved and mixed into meals like soups or stews. Whether Tillie's account of that conversation was the truth, a partial truth, or a calculated attempt to redirect blame toward the one person who knew as much as she did, was never fully resolved. What the police could confirm was that both women had operated within the same household network, the same extended family, and the same kitchens, and that the bodies buried around them shared a common cause of death. The papers began to speak of Klimek not as a solo murderer, but as the high priestess of a Bluebeard clique in Chicago's Little Poland neighborhood. Several other women from the surrounding streets were arrested and subsequently released for insufficient evidence. The investigation had no clean edges, and the full count of what had happened inside that community across the preceding decade was never established with certainty. On the 6th of March 1923, Tillie Klimek and Nellie Koulik were placed on trial before Judge Marcus Kavanaugh in the Cook County Courthouse. Tillie was tried specifically for the murder of Frank Kupczyk. Prosecutors Thomas Pendon and William McLaughlin built their case on the arsenic confirmed in Frank's exhumed remains, the life insurance policy Tillie had taken out on him, the $30 coffin she had stored in the basement before his death, and her own repeated public statements that he would not survive much longer. Tillie's defense presented a court-ordered psychological evaluation diagnosing her with dementia praecox and estimating her intellectual capacity at that of an 11-year-old. Her attorneys argued that Frank's death had resulted from alcohol poisoning rather than arsenic, and characterized her predictions of death as harmless folklore common within Polish immigrant communities. Throughout the proceedings, Tillie sat at the defense table wearing the black mourning hat she had knitted at Frank's bedside, the same hat she had worn to his funeral. Reporters noted that, unlike most of the husband killers who had been acquitted in Chicago courts, Klimek was not beautiful or charming, but a squat woman who spoke only broken English, despite having lived in the country since infancy. She was convicted on the 14th of March 1923 and showed no emotion when the sentence was delivered. When guards led her back to her cell, her only reported remark was that it had been hot in the courtroom. The sentence was life imprisonment, the harshest ever given to a woman in Cook County. Nellie Koulik was tried separately, spent nearly a year in custody, and was acquitted. Tillie Klimek served her sentence at the Illinois Women's Reformatory in Dwight, Illinois, and died there on the 20th of November 1936, at the age of 60. No family members came forward to claim her remains, and she was buried in an unmarked grave in Section 7 of Bohemian National Cemetery in Chicago, the same city where she had lived, married, and cooked for the better part of 6 decades. In prison, she had continued to taunt Nellie Koulik, once convincing her cousin that she was about to be taken out and hanged. Judge Marcus Kavanagh later reflected in his book The Criminal and His Allies that the jury had been unwilling to impose the death penalty not because the evidence was insufficient, he considered it staggering, but because a jury could not bring itself to condemn a woman of Tillie's appearance to death. Had the same evidence existed against a younger, more conventionally attractive defendant, he concluded, the outcome would have been different. Of the 20 people on the list compiled by investigators in November 1922, Tillie Klimek was tried for the death of exactly one. The remaining cases were closed the day she died in Dwight. They were never reopened. The names on that list, the husbands, the cousins, the teenagers in her care, and the children, belonged to people who lived on the same streets and ate from the same kitchen. Most of them never received an investigation. The record closed with Tillie's death in 1936, and the full account of what took place inside those apartments across Chicago's near north side remains, to this day, unfinished. If this video was worth your time, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.